In the heart of Beverly Hills, at a restaurant that served steaks cooked in 800-degree ovens, a cup of Earl Grey tea was about to change everything. But that evening, one of the 47 people there was Ozzy Osbourne, and he knew that real wealth wasn't hidden in your bank account, but in how you treated people. The Sterling Room was one of Los Angeles' most expensive restaurants. 2 Michelin stars, a minimum 3-week wait for reservations, an average bill of $650 per person. This wasn't just a place to eat. This was a stage where the wealthy showed off their luxuries to each other, took photos for social media, and closed business deals. In the far back corner of the restaurant, at a table slightly more isolated than the others, sat a 70-year-old man. He wore a black sweater, unbuttoned at the front, with a simple grey t-shirt underneath. His faded jeans had lost some color from too many washes, and on his feet were old, comfortable-looking sneakers. He wore his iconic sunglasses that partially hid his face, and his hair was messy as always. Waiters glanced at him as they passed, probably thinking he was someone retired from the music industry, maybe a producer or a former rock musician. The man was Ozzy Osbourne, the legendary vocalist of Black Sabbath, who'd sold over 100 million albums in his solo career, starred in an MTV reality show for years, and whose fortune was estimated at around $220 million, a rock icon. Now he sat there, waiting for his order. Something simple: grilled chicken, steamed vegetables, and a glass of water. The waiter asked in surprise, "Sir, are you sure?" "We have Wagyu beef, Maine lobster." Ozzy looked over his sunglasses and said in that Birmingham accent, "Mate, I've eaten enough fancy food to last 3 lifetimes. Just give me something simple." Just then, the restaurant's large glass doors opened and a group entered. The man walking in front immediately drew attention. In his mid-40s, he wore a traditional white thorb with a red and white checkered shema on his head. A Richard Mille watch gleamed on his wrist, a massive diamond ring on his finger, and there was such arrogance in his walk that it seemed as if the entire restaurant belonged to him. Behind him walked 2 bodyguards and a young woman. The restaurant manager rushed over. "Mr. Al-Zahrani, welcome back. Your usual table is ready." Sheikh Faisal Al-Zahrani was the youngest son of one of Dubai's wealthiest families. According to Forbes, his fortune was $3.8 billion. Oil, real estate, luxury hotels. He had his fingers in every sector. The group sat at the largest and most visible table in the center of the restaurant. Immediately, a flurry of activity began around them. 4 waiters and the manager started circling the table Ozzy watched from his corner. The way the man sat, how he looked at people, how he snapped his fingers to give orders, it all reminded him of something. "Bloody hell," he muttered to himself. "I've seen this type before. Money can buy you a table, but it can't buy you class." The waiter assigned to serve the table had been chosen. Sophie Moreau, 26 years old, with her hair tied back and a professional smile on her face. Sophie was working nights here while pursuing her master's in anthropology at UCLA. This job both covered her tuition and allowed her to observe people up close. But tonight, what she was about to witness would be far more challenging than any academic case study. Sophie held her breath as she approached Al-Zahrani's table. Colleagues from previous shifts had warned her, "When the sheikh comes in, be very careful. If you make one mistake, he won't talk to you. He'll talk to the manager, and you could lose your job." Sophie put on her professional smile and approached the table. Al-Zahrani began speaking without looking at the menu. He said something in Arabic, and the assistant beside him translated. "Sheikh wants the 2015 Chateau Latour, then the Wagyu ribeye, very rare, truffle risotto on the side, and tea. Earl Grey, very hot, bring it first." Sophie took the note and bowed her head slightly. "Of course, sir. Right away." Al-Zahrani never looked at Sophie. He continued scrolling on his phone as if Sophie wasn't even there, as if she were just a robot serving him. Sophie returned to the kitchen and relayed the order. When the chef heard the special requests, he frowned. This guy again. Always the most complicated orders, never a thank you. 10 minutes later, Sophie brought Al-Zahrani's Earl Grey tea on a silver tray. Just as she was about to set the tray on the table, Al-Zahrani suddenly moved. He lifted his head from his phone and slammed his hand on the table, gesturing to the man beside him to make a point. Sophie flinched, and reflexively, the tray in her hands swayed slightly. The cup slid forward an inch, and a few drops of hot tea splashed from the edge of the table onto the sleeve of Al-Zarani's white thorb. Time froze. Every sound in the restaurant cut off in an instant. Conversation stopped, forks hung in midair, the sommelier forgot about the glass he was pouring wine into. Everyone turned toward that table. Al-Zarani looked at his sleeve. The tea stain had left a small brown spot on the white fabric. Then he slowly raised his head. There was fury in his eyes, cold, merciless fury. His voice echoed to every corner of the restaurant. "You stupid, careless girl." Al-Zarani's voice filled the entire restaurant without needing to shout. The authority and contempt in his tone was a sharper weapon than the words themselves. "Do you have any idea how much this thorb costs? Do you?" Sophie stood frozen. The empty tray in her hands trembled. "Sir, I am so deeply sorry. It was an accident. I can—" Al-Zarani slammed his fist on the table, and the glasses jumped. "Accident? You call this incompetence an accident? This thorb is custom-made from Milan. It costs more than you make in a year, maybe 2 years." The restaurant manager came running over, his face drenched in sweat. "Mr. Al-Zarani, sir, please, we sincerely apologize. We will cover all dry cleaning costs, of course, and—" Al-Zarani silenced the manager with a sharp look. "Dry cleaning? You think this is about dry cleaning? This is about hiring incompetent staff who cannot do a simple job." Sophie's face had flushed red, but her eyes hadn't filled with tears. She bit her lip, trying to stay on her feet. Al-Zarani turned to her. "You will pay for this, personally. Your salary will be deducted until this is paid. Do you understand?" The manager tried to intervene. "Sir, that's really not necessary. We can—" Al-Zarani raised his hand to silence him. "I am not finished. This girl clearly does not belong in a place like this. She should be working in a fast food restaurant, not here." People at the surrounding tables had turned their heads in embarrassment. No one was intervening. A woman whispered to her friend, "That's so embarrassing." But none of them did anything. The wealthy customer was always right, wasn't he? Sophie stood with her head bowed, hands clasped in front of her, continuing to apologize. "Sir, please, I truly am sorry. I will personally—" Al-Zarani waved his hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. "Get out of my sight. Send someone else to serve this table. You are done here." But in that moment, a voice rose from the back corner of the restaurant. An older voice, slightly raspy but crystal clear, carrying a Birmingham accent with every word carefully chosen. "Mate, I think you're being a bit harsh there, don't you?" Everyone turned. The old man sitting at the corner table had slowly removed his sunglasses. His blue eyes looked directly at Al-Zarani. His features suddenly began to seem familiar to people at several tables. Despite his fortune, Ozzy Osbourne had never been arrogant, always treating people with respect. He stood up and began walking toward Al-Zarani's table. Ozzy's every step echoed on the restaurant's marble floor. He was 70 years old, but his walk still carried that old stage energy. His hands were in his pockets, his head tilted slightly to one side, and on his face was that famous Ozzy smile, both friendly and slightly dangerous. As he approached Al-Zarani's table, a few more tables began to take notice. A woman whispered to her friend, "Wait, is that Ozzy Osbourne?" Her friend pulled out her phone, but didn't dare take a picture. Ozzy stopped right next to Al-Zarani's table. His eyes were still locked on the sheikh, but there was no aggression in his voice, only genuine curiosity and slight bewilderment. "Sorry to interrupt your meal, mate, but I couldn't help overhearing, and I think there's been a bit of a misunderstanding here." Al-Zarani looked at him, trying to figure out who this old man was. His face seemed familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. "This is a private conversation," he said in a cold voice. "This does not concern you." Ozzy shook his head slightly and continued speaking in that Birmingham accent. "Well, see, that's where you're wrong, mate. When you start shouting at someone in the middle of a restaurant, it becomes everyone's concern, especially when that someone is just trying to do their job." A slight murmur rose around them. People were now pulling out their phones. A bodyguard stepped forward, but Al-Zarani stopped him with his hand. "And who are you to lecture me about how I treat my staff?" he said, a slight hesitation in his voice because he almost remembered who this man was. Ozzy smiled, that famous crooked smile of his. "Name's Ozzy. Ozzy Osbourne. Maybe you've heard of me. Maybe you haven't. Doesn't really matter. What matters is this young lady here," he said, turning his head toward Sophie. "She made a mistake. A tiny, bloody accident, and you're treating her like she committed a crime." Al-Zarani's face changed. Ozzy Osbourne from Black Sabbath, the man whose fortune was worth millions, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars. But here he stood, in old clothes, without arrogance, like an ordinary person. "Mr. Osbourne," Al-Zarani said, his voice softening slightly but still defensive. "With all due respect, you do not understand. This is a very expensive garment. The stain—" Ozzy stopped him with his hand. "Mate, I don't give a damn about your expensive clothes. I've worn stage costumes worth more than a car and destroyed them in one show. You know why? Because they're just clothes, fabric, thread. They can be cleaned, replaced, forgotten. But the way you just treated this girl, that stain doesn't wash out." The restaurant was now completely silent. Everyone held their breath, watching. Sophie stood in the corner, her eyes brimming with tears, but she still wasn't crying. Ozzy turned to her and spoke in a soft voice. "Love, are you all right?" Sophie nodded, her voice hoarse. "Yes, sir, thank you." Ozzy turned back to Al-Zarani. "See, that's what real class looks like. She made a mistake, she apologized, she's willing to make it right. But you've got billions, fancy clothes, bodyguards, but you don't have what she has. Dignity." Al-Zahrani's face had turned red. Everyone around him was watching, phones recording, capturing this moment. "I don't need to be lectured by—" he started, but Ozzy continued in a calm voice. "No, mate, you don't need to be lectured. But you needed to be reminded. Money doesn't make you better than anyone. I've been rich, I've been poor, I've been famous, I've been forgotten. And I learned something. The way you treat people when you don't have to be nice to them, that's who you really are." Ozzy pulled out his wallet. An old, worn leather wallet. He took out $500 bills. Then he held them out to Sophie. "This is for you, love. Not because you made a mistake, but because you handled yourself with grace when someone treated you terribly. That's worth more than any tip." Sophie's eyes widened. "Sir, I can't accept—" Ozzy smiled. "You can and you will. Consider it a thank you for reminding me why I never eat at places like this." Then he turned to Al-Zarani. "And you, mate, your bill tonight? I'll cover it. All of it. Not because I'm showing off, but because I want you to remember something, that tea stain on your fancy clothes. It'll be gone tomorrow, but the way you made someone feel, that lasts forever. And trust me, when you've lived as long as I have, you realize what actually matters." Ozzy glanced at Sophie one last time, winked, and walked back to his own table. He sat down, saw that his order had arrived, and picked up his fork, as if nothing had happened. The restaurant slowly began to come back to life, but everyone was still in shock. Conversations continued in whispers. Forks clinked more gently. Eyes still darted between those two tables. Al-Zarani sat at his table, hands clasped, his gaze empty. He wasn't touching his food. The young woman beside him tried to say something, but the sheikh just shook his head. "Not now." 5 minutes passed, then 10. Al-Zarani's gaze slowly drifted to Sophie. The young woman was serving another table, her hands still trembling slightly, but she was trying to maintain her professional smile. The sheikh saw that moment. He saw that the girl was continuing her work even after being humiliated, after being insulted. And something inside him broke. Maybe his pride, maybe his conscience, or perhaps the old rock star's words were echoing in his head. How you treat people when you don't have to be nice, that's who you really are. A few more minutes passed. Then Al-Zarani took a deep breath and stood up. His bodyguards immediately sprang into action, but the sheikh raised his hand. "Stay here," He began walking, his steps heavy but determined. Sophie had just come out of the kitchen, holding an empty tray. When she saw Al-Zahrani, she flinched and stepped back. But the sheikh approached and bowed his head. "Miss, I must apologize to you. What I said, how I treated you, it was wrong, completely wrong. You made a small accident, and I behaved without honor. Please, forgive me." His voice this time was low and sincere. Sophie nodded in shock. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that." Al-Zahrani called the restaurant manager over. "This young lady's tips tonight, triple them. Her meals for the next month, complimentary. And," he paused, looking at Ozzy's table, "that gentleman's meal is also on my account as a thank you." The manager nodded in amazement. The sheikh returned to his table but didn't finish his meal. A few minutes later, as he prepared to leave, he passed by Ozzy's table. He stopped. "Mr. Osbourne, thank you. Tonight you taught me something I should have learned long ago." Ozzy looked up with that famous smile of his. "We all need reminding sometimes, mate. Even billionaires. Especially billionaires." That evening, as Ozzy quietly finished his meal, something unexpected happened. A couple from a nearby table approached, hesitant but grateful. "Mr. Osbourne, thank you for what you did. That took real courage." Ozzy shrugged with that familiar grin. "Nah, mate. Just common decency, that's all." The man smiled. "By the way, paranoid changed my life when I was a kid." Ozzy's eyes lit up. "Bloody hell, that was 1970. Makes me feel ancient, but I'm glad it meant something to you." A few more people stopped by before he left, some thanking him, others asking about Black Sabbath and his years with Sharon on MTV. Ozzy answered each question with patience and humor, never once mentioning what had just happened with the sheikh. As he stood to leave, Sophie appeared one last time. "Mr. Osbourne, thank you, not just for defending me, but for reminding me that I'm worth defending." Ozzy's expression softened. "Love, you keep being you. Don't let anyone dim your light. The world needs more people like you, not less." The next day, a message arrived in Sophie's inbox. From Al-Zahrani's assistant. The sheikh wanted to cover her tuition costs at UCLA, a full scholarship, and as an apology, a $10,000 donation. Sophie cried, but this time from happiness. Even with a fortune of $220 million, Ozzy Osbourne had never forgotten growing up in the poor neighborhoods of Birmingham. He had never forgotten that his mother cleaned the homes of the wealthy. And he had never forgotten that real wealth wasn't in your bank account, but in your heart. That night, in a luxury restaurant, a cup of tea was spilled, but the lesson learned was beyond any price.